In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
In the 41st millennium, there is only war. But war requires combatants who understand victory and defeat, who comprehend ideology and territory, who can hate and be hated in return. What happens when something arrives that recognizes none of these concepts? Something that views the countless trillions of the Imperium, the demonic legions of chaos, and the ancient Xenos empires as nothing more than fuel? The galaxy was about to learn that its endless conflicts were merely local squabbles in the face of true cosmic indifference. The warp storm designated Tempestus Maleficum had raged across Segmentum Obscurus for 3 centuries, a bleeding wound in reality that even the most seasoned navigators refused to approach. On the bridge of the Undying Resolve, rogue trader Captain Hestia Varn watched through adamantium-shielded viewports as her augur arrays screamed contradictory data. The storm was collapsing, impossible given its size, but something else was happening. Something worse. Captain, the warp signatures are inverting. Her navigator gasped, blood streaming from behind his third eye's protective seal. It's not a storm anymore. It's a wound. Something's pushing through from the other side. Reality split. There was no other way to describe it. The black void of space tore open like parchment, revealing not the swirling madness of the immaterium, but something else entirely. A cascade of colors that had no names. Geometric impossibilities that made even the ship's machine spirits scream in electronic agony. Through this rent in the universe stepped something vast. At first, Hestia thought it was a ship, then a space station. Then her mind simply refused to process the scale. The entity that emerged dwarfed her cruiser the way a hive city dwarfed a single human. It was vaguely humanoid in the way that a mountain might accidentally resemble a face. Broad shoulders supporting a massive head, limbs that could have been confused for continental shelves. Its surface seemed to shift between solid matter and something more fundamental, as if it existed on multiple planes simultaneously. But it was the helmet, or what her terror-shocked mind interpreted as a helmet, that froze the blood in her veins. That angular, impassive facade resembled nothing so much as an executioner's mask scaled up to planetary proportions. And it was looking directly at her ship. "Vox all channels," Hestia commanded, her voice surprisingly steady despite the religious terror crawling up her spine. "Transmit to any Imperial vessel, station, or world within range. Priority absolute. The Emperor protects. But something has arrived that may test even his divine will." The entity moved, and physics bent around it. Not the reality-warping madness of the warp, but something colder, more fundamental. Space itself seemed to contract as the being reached forward with one impossibly vast hand, not toward the Undying Resolve, but toward the nearby agri-world of Thessia Prime. Population, 14 billion. Strategic value, minimal. To the Imperium, it was one world among millions. To this entity, it appeared to be food. Galactus, the Devourer of Worlds, had arrived in the 41st millennium, and he was hungry. On Thessia Prime's northern continent, Planetary Governor Erasmus Volt received the priority transmission from orbit at the same moment his astropaths began screaming. Some died instantly, their minds unable to process the psychic pressure radiating from the entity in orbit. Others survived only to deliver fragmented warnings that made no sense. The hunger, the consumer, the end of plenty. Erasmus was a practical man who had governed Thessia Prime for 40 years through tithes, rebellions, and 2 minor Xenos incursions. He knew how to read a threat. He ordered the planetary defense lasers to full charge, scrambled the local PDF, and transmitted a distress call to the nearest Navy battle group. Standard protocol for Xenos contact. He even managed to complete most of these orders before the sky changed. The entity, now impossibly close despite the laws of orbital mechanics suggesting otherwise, extended its hand fully toward the planet. Erasmus saw it through his office's armored window. Fingers spread wide, palm downward, like a priest blessing the faithful. Except this was no benediction. The air began to shimmer, not with heat, but with something more fundamental being stripped away. The lush agricultural fields that stretched to every horizon started to brown, to wither, to die, but it wasn't mere death. The plants didn't simply expire. They seemed to fade, their essence drawn upward toward that waiting hand. The verdant green of Thessia Prime's breadbasket began to gray, as if color itself was being consumed. "Fire everything!" Erasmus roared into the Vox. "For the Emperor, fire!" 100 defense laser installations, each capable of cracking battleship armor, lanced upward in pillars of coherent light. They struck the entity's palm and simply stopped, not reflected or absorbed in any conventional sense. The energy beams reached the entity's surface and ceased to exist, adding their fury to whatever cosmic metabolism was currently attempting to drain his world dry. But something was wrong. Galactus could feel it, even through his desperate hunger. This world resisted. The energy he drew felt different, tainted, but not in the way of a polluted ecosystem. There was something else woven into the very essence of this planet, something that burned with a different kind of power. Faith. Billions of minds united in prayer to a god emperor, creating a psychic resonance that interfered with his feeding process. For the first time in eons, Galactus experienced inefficiency. The energy he drew from Thessia Prime came slowly, fighting him at every level. Where he should have consumed the planet's biosphere in moments, instead he found himself locked in a contest of wills against something he'd never encountered before. Organized, weaponized belief. He increased his draw, forcing the issue. The planet's surface began to crack under the strain, tectonic plates grinding as he pulled harder at the life force beneath. In his wake across 1,000 universes, worlds had died peacefully, their end so swift that most inhabitants never knew what happened. Here, they would know. They would feel every moment. On the bridge of the Undying Resolve, Navigator Corinth suddenly straightened despite the blood running from all 3 of his eyes. "Captain," he whispered with a voice of prophecy. The Astronomicon just flickered. Terra noticed. "The Inquisition is coming." Hestia Varn crossed herself in the sign of the Aquila and began to pray. Not for salvation. She was a void-born traitor who knew the universe's cruelty too well for such naivete. She prayed that whatever came next, humanity would at least understand what killed them. Below, Galactus continued to feed, unaware that he had just announced his presence to the single most paranoid, militarized, and zealously genocidal civilization in the galaxy. A civilization that had been fighting apocalypses for 10,000 years and had learned to meet extinction with bolter fire and unwavering faith. The Imperium of man did not negotiate with threats to humanity's survival. And Galactus had just become the greatest threat they had ever faced. Galactus pulled harder at Thessia Prime's essence, and the planet screamed. Not metaphorically, the atmosphere itself resonated with the psychic death wail of 14 billion souls realizing their doom. But the resistance continued, a phenomenon that both intrigued and frustrated the Devourer. In his native universe, Planetary consumption was a simple matter of cosmic physics. His body converted biospheric energy into the power cosmic that sustained his existence. Here, something in the fundamental architecture of reality fought back. The problem was theological in nature, though Galactus didn't yet understand this. Every human on Thessia Prime had been raised in the Imperial Creed, their faith in the God Emperor as fundamental to their existence as oxygen. 14 billion minds united in prayer created a psychic resonance that the Imperium called the light of the Emperor's grace. What Galactus experienced was more prosaic: interference. The warp and materium were entangled here in ways that defied his cosmic understanding, and human faith generated a measurable resistance to his feeding mechanism. He could overcome it. He was Galactus. But it would take time he didn't have. His cosmic reserves were depleting faster than this inefficient feeding could replenish them. For the first time since arriving in this bizarre universe, he felt something approaching concern. Below, Governor Erasmus Volt died when his palace collapsed as the planet's crust buckled. His last words, transmitted across the failing Vox network, were, "The Emperor protects." 20 million citizens in the capital hive repeated the phrase as their city folded inward. Their faith might not save them, but it bought time. Precious seconds that slowed the consumption, that made the entity work for every joule of stolen life. Galactus calculated. At this rate, he would drain perhaps 40% of the planet's viable energy before diminishing returns made continued feeding pointless, unacceptable. In his universe, he fed completely or not at all. Partial consumption left worlds as lifeless husks that offended his cosmic aesthetic. But here, efficiency demanded adaptation. He released Thessia Prime. The planet hung in space, still alive but ravaged. Its oceans had receded by 30%. Its forests were skeletal graveyards. 7 billion humans remained, though most would die in the coming months as their ecosystems collapsed. From Galactus's perspective, the world was now worthless. Too damaged to finish consuming, too depleted to warrant further effort. He needed to understand this universe's rules before attempting another feeding, and he needed information. Galactus reached out with his cosmic awareness, a sense that normally allowed him to detect viable worlds across light years. The feedback nearly staggered him. This galaxy was drowning in life, trillions upon trillions of sentient beings spread across millions of worlds. A feast beyond measure. But layered over this abundance was something else. A psychic screaming. A dimensional overlay of pure madness that seemed to exist parallel to normal space. The warp, though he had no name for it yet. And everywhere he looked, that strange resistance, faith, fear, hatred, and desperation mixing into a psychic static that would make every feeding as difficult as Thessia Prime. He needed a herald, someone who understood this universe's peculiarities, who could scout viable feeding grounds and navigate whatever bizarre metaphysics governed this reality. Galactus had employed heralds for eons. Transformed beings granted a portion of his power cosmic in exchange for service. They found him food. They warned populations, or didn't, according to their nature. They were tools, and he needed one now. The Undying Resolve still orbited nearby, its crew frozen in religious terror as they watched the entity that had savaged Thessia Prime turn its attention toward them. Captain Hestia Varn had approximately 3 seconds to realize what was about to happen before reality inverted around her ship. Cosmic energy flooded the vessel. Not destructive, transformative. Galactus reached into the ship's crew with the casual precision of a surgeon, analyzing their minds and bodies for suitability. Most were too weak, their spirits too broken by what they'd witnessed. But the captain herself possessed something valuable. Determination forged through decades of void survival, a mind sharp enough to navigate both the physical and political dangers of the Imperium, and critically, knowledge of this galaxy's structure. Hestia Varn felt her body dissolve into pure energy, then reconstitute as something more. The power cosmic flooded her cells, rewriting her on a fundamental level. Her flesh became something between matter and energy. Her consciousness expanded to encompass cosmic awareness she'd never imagined. She could feel the distant stars, sense the gravitational dance of planets, perceive energy flows that human eyes were never meant to witness. But unlike heralds in Galactus's native universe, the transformation felt incomplete. Wrong. The power cosmic fought against something already present in her. The psychic resonance that every human in this universe carried, their connection to the warp and the Emperor's distant light. Galactus was trying to make her his herald, but the 41st Millennium wouldn't release its claim on her soul. The result was something unprecedented. A herald divided. Hestia retained her mind, her memories, her loyalty to the Imperium. But she also felt Galactus's hunger as her own. She knew, with absolute certainty, that he needed to feed, that he would feed, that worlds would die because it was his nature, as inevitable as stars burning or entropy increasing. "No," she whispered, her voice now carrying harmonics of cosmic energy. "No, I won't help you murder my species." Galactus regarded his defective herald with something approaching curiosity. In his universe, the power cosmic overwrote such resistance. Here, it seemed, free will was more deeply embedded in consciousness. Interesting. Irrelevant, but interesting. He spoke, and his voice was not sound, but fundamental reality asserting itself. When Galactus communicated, the universe itself became his medium. "You are herald. You will serve. Show me worlds unmarred by the psychic interference that plagues this feeding ground." Hestia felt the compulsion crash against her will like a tidal wave against a seawall. The power cosmic demanded obedience, but her faith in the Emperor, her loyalty to humanity, and sheer stubborn defiance created resistance. She could feel both truths simultaneously. She was Galactus's herald, and she was an Imperial citizen. The contradiction threatened to tear her mind apart. "There are no such worlds," she gasped, buying time to think. "Every human world bears the Emperor's light. Every Xenos world is claimed by other powers. This galaxy is already being consumed, by us, by chaos, by the Tyranids. You're just another apocalypse in a universe defined by apocalypse." Galactus processed this. His cosmic awareness confirmed her words. This galaxy was a war zone on a scale that dwarfed anything in his experience. Not the clean wars of expansion he'd witnessed in other realities, but an eternal grinding conflict where every faction fought for survival against impossible odds. The biomass, he sensed, wasn't pristine. It was claimed, fought over, corrupted, or defended by powers that bent reality itself. "Then you will show me the unclaimed worlds," Galactus commanded. "The empty spaces between your conflicts. I will feed on what your species has not yet poisoned with faith." Hestia's enhanced awareness suddenly perceived something that made her transformed blood run cold. Across the sector, Vox transmissions were flooding through relay stations. Astropathic choirs were screaming his arrival across the warp. And most terrifying of all, she could sense a massive psychic presence taking notice. Multiple presences, actually. The Inquisition, Chaos cults, Eldar farseers, even stranger things lurking at the galaxy's edges. Everyone knew he was here now, and everyone would respond according to their nature. "They're coming for you," Hestia warned, her herald nature compelling honesty even as her human loyalty hoped they would succeed. "The Inquisition will attempt to destroy you. Chaos will try to corrupt you. The Xenos will see you as either threat or opportunity. You've just painted a target on yourself that spans the entire galaxy." Galactus regarded the ravaged world of Thessia Prime, calculating the inefficiency of his feeding. Then he looked to his herald, this strange divided being that somehow retained defiance even while transformed by his power. "Let them come," he stated with the certainty of cosmic law. "I have consumed the hearts of stars and devoured the corpses of gods. This universe's conflicts are irrelevant. I will feed. They will provide biomass or become obstacles to be removed. Show me the next world, Herald, or I will select one at random." Hestia closed her eyes, still human enough for that gesture, and made a choice that would haunt her forever. If she refused, he would randomly consume Imperial worlds. If she guided him, perhaps she could minimize the damage, direct him toward already lost systems, Xenos worlds, anything to buy time for the Imperium to mount a response. "There's a dead system 3 parsecs from here," she said quietly. "Tyranids stripped it 40 years ago. Nothing left but barren rock. But beyond that, there are others." She was condemning worlds with every word. But she was also learning. Galactus was powerful beyond measure. But he wasn't invincible here. The universe fought back. And if it could slow him down once, perhaps it could stop him entirely. As Galactus prepared to move toward the coordinates his herald provided, neither noticed the faint shimmer of a webway portal opening in the void behind them. Eldar eyes had witnessed the entity's arrival, and the Farseers of Craftworld Ulthway were already consulting runes older than the Imperium itself, searching for any prophecy that might explain what horror had been unleashed upon the galaxy. Across the galaxy, seers and prophets awoke screaming. On Terra, in the throne room where 10,000 psychers died daily to sustain the God Emperor's psychic beacon, the Astronomicon flickered for the 3rd time in as many hours. High Lord Inquisitor Torvin Kale felt the disturbance through his psychic hood and immediately ordered a full investigation. Something had entered Imperial space that registered as neither warp spawn nor Xenos invasion. Something that existed purely in real space, yet bent reality around itself like a singularity. The Ordo Xenos demanded immediate jurisdiction. In the Eye of Terror, Abaddon the Despoiler stood before a council of chaos sorcerers who babbled contradictory prophecies. The chaos gods themselves seemed confused. This entity that had torn through the warp carried no allegiance to any power, showed no vulnerability to temptation, and radiated a hunger so pure and absolute that even Khorne's bloodlust seemed petty by comparison. Tzeentch's most gifted seers could not predict its movements. Nurgle's plagues found no purchase on its cosmic form. Slaanisha's temptations meant nothing to a being that desired only sustenance. "Find out what it wants," Abaddon commanded. "Everything can be corrupted. Everything serves chaos eventually." On Craftworld Ulthway, Farseer Eldrad Ulthran consulted the runes with trembling hands. He had lived for millennia, had witnessed the fall of the Eldar, had guided his people through 10,000 years of gradual extinction. The runes had never shown him anything like this. Every casting produced the same result. The Devourer rune, signifying entropy and consumption, surrounded by a void where no other runes would fall, as if the entity's future consumed all other possibilities. "It is not of this reality," Eldrad spoke to his assembled council. "It carries the taint of elsewhere, a universe with different laws, different meanings, It does not hate us. It does not even see us as enemies. We are simply... He paused, the horror of realization settling over him, food. And in the tomb world of Salamis, Trazyn the Infinite added a new entry to his collection catalogs. Subject: unknown cosmic entity. Classification: unprecedented. Threat level: absolute. Collection priority: maximum. If this being truly consumed worlds, then it represented both an existential threat and the greatest acquisition opportunity in 60 million years. Trazyn began calculating what forces he would need to capture, not kill. Capture something of such cosmic magnitude. But none of these powers moved quickly enough. Galactus arrived at the coordinates his herald provided and found exactly what she'd promised. A dead system stripped clean by the Tyranid hive fleet Kraken decades ago. 7 lifeless rocks orbited a dying star, their surfaces scoured down to bare minerals. The Tyranids had been thorough. Not even bacteria remained. To Galactus's cosmic senses, these worlds registered as voids, offering nothing worth consuming. "This is worthless," he stated, cosmic frustration radiating from his form. Hestia, now orbiting him as his herald, felt the double-edged nature of her situation. Part of her rejoiced. She'd bought humanity a few more hours. Another part, the herald nature granted by the power cosmic, felt his hunger as her own and desperately wanted to guide him to viable feeding. The contradiction was agonizing. "I warned you," she said. "The Tyranids are a xeno species that consumes biomass. They've already harvested thousands of worlds. Chaos corruption renders others toxic. Necron tomb worlds are lifeless by design. And every human world carries that psychic resistance you experienced. This galaxy has been strip-mined by apocalypses for millennia." Galactus processed this information with growing irritation. In his native universe, the concept of competition for planetary biomass was absurd. He was unique, singular, the only devourer. Here he found himself in a feeding ground already contested by other cosmic-scale predators. The Tyranids alone represented a threat he hadn't anticipated. A species-wide entity that consumed worlds through biological rather than cosmic means, but with similar totality. "Show me these Tyranids," Galactus commanded. "If they feed as I do, they possess biomass worth consuming." Hestia felt horror and dark humor mix in her transformed consciousness. The idea of Galactus attempting to consume a Tyranid fleet was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. The hive mind was a psychic entity spanning galaxies, controlling trillions of organisms. What would happen if Galactus tried to drain that? Before she could respond, reality shuddered. Not the clean spatial manipulation that Galactus employed, but something more chaotic. The warp tearing open like infected flesh. From the wound in space emerged a vessel that defied sane geometry. A chaos cruiser bearing the marks of the Black Legion, its hull covered in screaming faces and constantly shifting blasphemous symbols. Aboard the vengeful apostle, Chaos sorcerer Lord Malovar the Thousand-Eyed spoke with voices borrowed from demons. He had crossed the Imperium's battle lines specifically to reach this entity, driven by visions granted by Tzeentch himself. The architect of fate had shown him a possibility. This cosmic being, corrupted by chaos, transformed into a weapon that would devour the Imperium world by world. Ancient One. Malovar's voice echoed across the void through demonic amplification. I bring you an offer from powers beyond mortal comprehension. You hunger. We can show you worlds aplenty, worlds already marked for consumption, free from the resistance you encountered. All we ask in return is cooperation. Galactus turned his attention to the Chaos vessel, and Malovar immediately understood why lesser beings cowered before this entity. Those eyes, if they could be called eyes, held the weight of cosmic indifference. Galactus didn't hate chaos. He simply didn't register it as relevant. "You offer me what is already mine to take," Galactus responded, his voice causing the vengeful apostle's hull to vibrate dangerously. "I do not bargain. I do not cooperate. I consume." But Malovar had prepared for resistance. He unleashed a binding ritual centuries in the crafting, designed to trap and enslave entities of immense power. Warp energy erupted from the vengeful apostle in chains of solidified madness, each link forged from the souls of 1,000 sacrifices. And the chains wrapped around Galactus, attempting to bind him to Chaos's will. For approximately 3 seconds, the ritual worked. Galactus felt the warp's touch trying to corrupt his essence, to reshape him into something that served the dark gods. In those 3 seconds, the Chaos gods themselves reached through their servant, offering Galactus everything: infinite worlds to consume, power beyond measure, a place at their side as the 5th Chaos god. Galactus examined the offer with the same cosmic indifference he applied to all things. Then, he rejected it. The power cosmic surged outward, not attacking the chains but simply asserting a fundamental truth. Galactus was. He existed as a force of cosmic law, as inevitable as entropy. The warp represented change, mutation, desire. Where these two forces met, reality itself had to choose which principle took precedence. Reality chose Galactus. The chains shattered, not broke, shattered, their component souls released back into the warp, screaming warnings of what they'd touched. Something that couldn't be changed, couldn't be corrupted, couldn't be tempted because it existed on a level of cosmic function below such concepts. Galactus didn't desire power, he was power. He didn't hunger for anything except sustenance. His hunger was a law of his existence, not a weakness to exploit. Malovar had one moment to realize his catastrophic mistake before Galactus reached out with one vast hand and simply grasped the vengeful apostle. The ship's defensive fields, blessed by all 4 Chaos gods, meant nothing. Galactus pulled, and the vessel's energy, its plasma drives, its demon engines, the very life force of its crew, flowed into him. It wasn't a proper feeding. Starships didn't possess the concentrated biospheric energy he required. But the act demonstrated a principle. Galactus could adapt. If planetary consumption remained difficult, he could drain vessels, stations, anything with sufficient energy density. Less efficient, certainly, but in a universe this densely populated with sapient life, there were other options beyond pristine worlds. The vengeful apostle became a lifeless hulk in seconds, its crew dead, its demon engines silenced, even the corruption staining its hull somehow purified by absolute consumption. Galactus released the vessel, and it drifted away, now just wreckage. Hestia watched with horrified fascination. Her herald senses analyzed what had just occurred. Galactus had proven himself immune to chaos corruption and capable of draining energy from sources beyond planets. This was both terrifying and tactically valuable information. "You've just made an enemy of chaos," she warned. "The dark gods don't accept rejection well." "They are irrelevant," Galactus stated, "as are all powers in this universe. I will feed regardless of their approval." But even as he spoke, Galactus's cosmic awareness detected something concerning. The energy he'd consumed from Thessia Prime and the Chaos vessel wasn't replenishing his reserves as efficiently as it should. The universe's bizarre physics, This warp and materium duality created friction in his cosmic metabolism. He was still losing more energy than he gained. At this rate, he would starve within weeks. "Herald," he commanded Hestia, "this universe's laws resist my nature. Explain the mechanism. Why does feeding here cost more than it returns?" Hestia felt the compulsion to answer, warring with her desire to withhold tactical information. The Herald nature won, forcing honesty. The warp and real space are entangled. Every living thing here has a presence in both dimensions. When you consume physical matter, you're only getting half the energy. The other half exists in the warp where you can't reach. And human faith creates psychic resistance that burns energy from both sources simultaneously. Galactus processed this. He was attempting to feed in a universe with fundamentally different energy dynamics. It was as if he'd tried to eat in a dimension where matter and antimatter spontaneously canceled each other out. Theoretically possible, but catastrophically inefficient. He needed to adapt, to learn, or to find a way to consume both material and psychic energy simultaneously. And elsewhere in the galaxy, 300 inquisitorial vessels converged on Segmentum Obscurus, bearing exterminatus weapons, forbidden archaeotech, and the grim certainty that whatever had arrived in Imperial space would die, or the Imperium would burn trying to kill it. Word count, 1,847. Awaiting continue. Retry I continue, Section 4. The Inquisitorial fleet arrived in system 72 hours after Galactus's first appearance, led by Inquisitor Lord Constantin Valdez of the Ordo Xenos. Valdez was a veteran of 40 years fighting humanity's alien enemies. He'd overseen the exterminatos of 17 worlds, personally executed 3 rogue psychers powerful enough to level hive cities, and once walked the surface of a Necron tomb world and survived. He did not believe in mercy, compromise, or hesitation when humanity's survival was at stake. What he saw through the primary viewport of his flagship, the Eternal Vigil, defied every xenobiological classification in the Inquisition's archives. "Augur analysis?" Valdez demanded, his voice clipped and cold. Tech Priest Magos Artemis 7 interfaced directly with the ship's machine spirits, data flooding through 17 neural ports. Classification: impossible. Mass: equivalent to a small moon, but density fluctuates outside known parameters. Energy signature: reading as stellar-level output, but concentrated in a humanoid form. Threat assessment: absolute. Lord Inquisitor, this entity could destroy our fleet with minimal effort. "Everything can be killed," Valdez stated flatly. He'd built his career on that principle. Tactical assessment, weaknesses, vulnerabilities. Give me something to work with. Negative patterns detected in recent consumption attempt. Artemis 7 reported, his mechanical voice betraying something approaching excitement. Subject attempted to feed on Thessia Prime, but achieved only partial consumption. Analysis suggests Imperial faith creates measurable psychic resistance. The God Emperor's light protects even in death. Valdez allowed himself a thin smile. Faith as a weapon. The ecclesiarchy would be pleased. But faith alone wouldn't kill this thing. He needed to understand it first. "Hail the entity," he ordered. "Standard first contact protocols. Let's see if it can be reasoned with." The Vox transmission crossed the void, encrypted in 17 languages, including High Gothic, Binary, and several Xenos tongues the Inquisition had acquired through interrogation. Galactus received the communication and understood it instantly. Not through translation, but through cosmic awareness that grasped the fundamental meaning beneath language. "Unknown entity. This is Inquisitor Lord Constantin Valdez of the Emperor's Holy Inquisition. You have violated Imperial space and attempted to consume an Imperial world. By the authority granted to me by the God Emperor of mankind, I demand you explain your presence and purpose. Galactus regarded the fleet of warships arrayed before him. 300 vessels bearing weapons that could crack continents. Crewed by humans who genuinely believed their faith made them invincible. In his native universe, such naivete would be charming. Here, it was actively dangerous. Their collective faith created a psychic resonance that made the fleet itself harder to consume than it should be. "I am Galactus," he responded. His voice transmitted not through Vox systems, but by manipulating the electromagnetic spectrum itself. Every receiver in the Inquisitorial fleet heard him simultaneously. "I consume worlds to sustain my existence. Your species is irrelevant to this function. Withdraw or be removed as an obstacle." On the bridge of the Eternal Vigil, Valdez listened to the translation and felt cold certainty settle in his gut. This wasn't a Xenos invasion. It wasn't a demonic incursion. This was something worse, a natural force that viewed humanity the way humans viewed bacteria. No hatred, no ideology, just cosmic hunger. "It cannot be reasoned with," Valdez stated. "Prepare exterminatus protocols. We'll destroy it before it can consume another world." But before the order could be transmitted, Hestia intervened. She materialized on the Eternal Vigil's bridge through spatial manipulation granted by her herald status. One moment absent, the next simply present. The bridge crew raised weapons instantly, but Hestia raised her hands in a gesture of peace even as cosmic energy crackled around her transformed body. "Don't," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's machine spirits whimper. "I'm Captain Hestia Varn, formerly of the rogue trader vessel Undying Resolve. Galactus transformed me into his herald. I've seen what he can do. Your exterminatus weapons won't even slow him down." Valdez studied her with the cold, analytical gaze that had dissected 1,000 Xenos threats. "You bear the taint of transformation. Standard protocol demands immediate execution. Give me one reason why I shouldn't burn you where you stand." "Because I'm still loyal to the Imperium," Hestia said desperately. "The transformation compels me to serve him, but my faith in the Emperor remains. I'm caught between two masters, and it's tearing me apart. But I can help you. I know how he thinks. I know his weaknesses." "There are no weaknesses," Artemis 7 interjected. "Our scans show—" "Your scans are incomplete," Hestia interrupted. "He's starving. The warp interferes with his feeding mechanism. Every world he tries to consume costs him more energy than he gains because human faith creates psychic resistance. He's powerful beyond measure, but this universe is killing him slowly. He needs to adapt or he'll die within weeks." Valdez processed this information with the speed of a man who'd spent decades making life or death decisions. If the entity was vulnerable, truly vulnerable, then it could be killed. Or better yet, it could be manipulated. "Can you control him?" Valdez asked bluntly. "No, but I can influence his choices. Direct him toward targets that serve Imperial interests. Maybe buy enough time for the Mechanicus to develop a weapon that can actually hurt him." It was a terrible plan. It required trusting a transformed herald whose loyalty was compromised. It meant weaponizing Galactus against the Imperium's enemies while praying they could destroy him before he consumed too many Imperial worlds. But Valdez had built his career on terrible plans that worked. "What does he want right now?" Valdez demanded. "To understand why feeding is inefficient, to adapt, and—" Hestia hesitated, feeling the herald compulsion war with her human reluctance. lies to find the Tyranids. He believes a species that consumes worlds might possess biomass worth draining. Every human on the bridge fell silent. The idea of Galactus encountering the Tyranid hive mind was either catastrophically brilliant or brilliantly catastrophic. If Galactus could consume a hive fleet, he might eliminate one of humanity's greatest threats. Or he might drain enough biomass to become truly unstoppable. "Where's the nearest hive fleet?" Valdez asked Artemis 7. "Hive Fleet Leviathan, Segmentum Tempestus, currently consuming the Octarius sector," the tech priest responded immediately. "Estimated biomass, several trillion organisms across 14,000 vessels." Valdez made his decision with the cold certainty that had served him for 4 decades. "We direct him toward Leviathan. 2 apocalypses meet. Perhaps they destroy each other. At minimum, we buy time to prepare a real solution." "And if he survives? If he drains the hive fleet and becomes stronger?" Hestia asked. "Then we deploy the Blackstone fortresses, awaken the Necrons from their tomb worlds, make pacts with demons if necessary. The Imperium has survived 10,000 years by doing whatever was necessary for humanity's survival. This is just another Tuesday." Valdez turned to Hestia. "You can convince him to hunt the Tyranids?" "I can try. But understand, when Galactus fights the hive mind, we're watching 2 forces of nature collide. The collateral damage will be measured in systems, not worlds." "Acceptable," Valdez said without hesitation. "The Emperor protects, and if he doesn't, we'll do it ourselves." Hestia returned to Galactus, who had been analyzing the Inquisitorial fleet with growing impatience. The warships hadn't attacked yet, which suggested some level of strategic thinking. Interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. If they became obstacles, he would drain their energy and move on. "The Inquisitor has offered information," Hestia said carefully. "There's a Xenos species that consumes worlds as you do, the Tyranids. They're biological rather than cosmic, but their total biomass exceeds anything you've encountered in this universe. Trillions of organisms, all connected through a psychic hive mind." Galactus's interest sharpened. A species that consumed worlds successfully despite this universe's strange physics. They must have adapted to the warp-materium duality. Studying them, or better yet consuming them, might provide the key to efficient feeding. "Show me these Tyranids," he commanded. Hestia provided the coordinates, knowing she was condemning trillions of Tyranid organisms while potentially saving trillions of humans. The moral calculus made her sick, but her herald nature compelled service. She was becoming the weapon she'd feared, a guide who led apocalypse to the Imperium's enemies. As Galactus prepared to travel toward the Octarius sector, he failed to notice several critical details. First, the Inquisitorial fleet was discreetly deploying observation satellites to track his movements. Second, a series of Eldar webway portals had opened and closed in his wake. Far-seers gathering data for some larger plan. Third, deep in the tomb world of Solemnis, Trazyn the Infinite had begun mobilizing Necron fleets with one singular purpose: acquire this cosmic being for his collection, even if it meant deploying weapons that hadn't been activated in 60 million years. And finally, in the warp itself, the 4 Chaos Gods watched with growing frustration. Galactus couldn't be corrupted. He couldn't be tempted. He barely acknowledged their existence. This was unacceptable. Everything served chaos eventually. Everything had a weakness. The gods began to plot, each according to their nature. Khorne saw a warrior to be defeated in glorious combat. Nurgle saw an immortal being whose hunger mirrored decay and entropy. Tzeentch saw a cosmic equation that needed solving. And Slaanesh saw the ultimate challenge, a being whose only desire was sustenance, pure and absolute. If Galactus couldn't be corrupted, then perhaps his herald could be. Hestia Varn still retained her humanity, her emotions, her faith. And where humanity existed, chaos could take root. The game was just beginning, and Galactus was moving exactly where multiple powers wanted him, toward a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy regardless of who won. The Inquisitorial fleet arrived in-system 72 hours after Galactus's first appearance. Led by Inquisitor Lord Constantin Valdez of the Ordo Xenos. Valdez was a veteran of 40 years, fighting humanity's alien enemies. He'd overseen the exterminatus of 17 worlds, personally executed 3 rogue psychers powerful enough to level Hive cities, and once walked the surface of a Necron tomb world and survived. He did not believe in mercy, compromise, or hesitation when humanity's survival was at stake. What he saw through the primary viewport of his flagship, the Eternal Vigil, defied every xenobiological classification in the Inquisition's archives. Augur analysis? Valdez demanded, his voice clipped and cold. Tech priest Magos Artemis 7 interfaced directly with the ship's machine spirits. Data flooding through 17 neural ports. Classification: impossible. Mass: equivalent to a small moon, but density fluctuates outside known parameters. Energy signature: reading as stellar-level output, but concentrated in a humanoid form. Threat assessment: absolute. Lord Inquisitor, this entity could destroy our fleet with minimal effort. Everything can be killed, Valdez stated flatly. He'd built his career on that principle. Tactical assessment, weaknesses, vulnerabilities. Give me something to work with. Negative patterns detected in recent consumption attempt, Artemis 7 reported, his mechanical voice betraying something approaching excitement. Subject attempted to feed on Thessia Prime but achieved only partial consumption. Analysis suggests Imperial faith creates measurable psychic resistance. The God Emperor's light protects even in death. Valdez allowed himself a thin smile. Faith as a weapon. The ecclesiarchy would be pleased. But faith alone wouldn't kill this thing. He needed to understand it first. Hail the entity, he ordered. Standard first contact protocols. Let's see if it can be reasoned with. The Vox transmission crossed the void, encrypted in 17 languages, including High Gothic, Binary, and several Xenos tongues the Inquisition had acquired through interrogation. Galactus received the communication and understood it instantly. Not through translation, but through cosmic awareness that grasped the fundamental meaning beneath language. Unknown entity. This is Inquisitor Lord Constantine Valdez of the Emperor's Holy Inquisition. You have violated Imperial space and attempted to consume an Imperial world. By the authority granted to me by the God Emperor of mankind, I demand you explain your presence and purpose. Galactus regarded the fleet of warships arrayed before him. 300 vessels bearing weapons that could crack continents, crewed by humans who genuinely believed their faith made them invincible. In his native universe, such naivete would be charming. Here, it was actively dangerous. Their collective faith created a psychic resonance that made the fleet itself harder to consume than it should be. I am Galactus, he responded, his voice transmitted not through Vox systems, but by manipulating the electromagnetic spectrum itself. Every receiver in the Inquisitorial fleet heard him simultaneously. I consume worlds to sustain my existence. Your species is irrelevant to this function. Withdraw or be removed as an obstacle. On the bridge of the Eternal Vigil, Valdez listened to the translation and felt cold certainty settle in his gut. This wasn't a Xenos invasion. It wasn't a demonic incursion. This was something worse. A natural force that viewed humanity the way humans viewed bacteria. No hatred, no ideology, just cosmic hunger. It cannot be reasoned with, Valdez stated. Prepare exterminatus protocols. We'll destroy it before it can consume another world. But before the order could be transmitted, Hestia intervened. She materialized on the Eternal Vigil's bridge through spatial manipulation granted by her herald status. One moment absent, the next simply present. The bridge crew raised weapons instantly, but Hestia raised her hands in a gesture of peace, even as cosmic energy crackled around her transformed body. "Don't," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's machine spirits whimper. "I'm Captain Hestia Varn, formerly of the rogue trader vessel Undying Resolve. Galactus transformed me into his herald. I've seen what he can do. Your exterminatus weapons won't even slow him down." Valdez studied her with the cold, analytical gaze that had dissected 1,000 Xenos threats. "You bear the taint of transformation. Standard protocol demands immediate execution. Give me one reason why I shouldn't burn you where you stand." "Because I'm still loyal to the Imperium," Hestia said desperately. "The transformation compels me to serve him, but my faith in the Emperor remains. I'm caught between two masters, and it's tearing me apart. But I can help you. I know how he thinks. I know his weaknesses." "There are no weaknesses," Artemis 7 interjected. "Our scans show—" "Your scans are incomplete," Hestia interrupted. "He's starving. The warp interferes with his feeding mechanism. Every world he tries to consume costs him more energy than he gains because human faith creates psychic resistance. He's powerful beyond measure. But this universe is killing him slowly. He needs to adapt or he'll die within weeks." Valdez processed this information with the speed of a man who'd spent decades making life or death decisions. If the entity was vulnerable, truly vulnerable, then it could be killed. Or better yet, it could be manipulated. "Can you control him?" Valdez asked bluntly. "No, but I can influence his choices. Direct him toward targets that serve Imperial interests. Maybe buy enough time for the Mechanicus to develop a weapon that can actually hurt him." It was a terrible plan. It required trusting a transformed herald whose loyalty was compromised. It meant weaponizing Galactus against the Imperium's enemies while praying they could destroy him before he consumed too many Imperial worlds. But Valdez had built his career on terrible plans that worked. "What does he want right now?" Valdez demanded. "To understand why feeding is inefficient, to adapt, and—" Hestia hesitated, feeling the herald compulsion war with her human reluctance. "To find the Tyranids. He believes a species that consumes worlds might possess biomass worth draining." Every human on the bridge fell silent. The idea of Galactus encountering the Tyranid hive mind was either catastrophically brilliant or brilliantly catastrophic. If Galactus could consume a hive fleet, he might eliminate one of humanity's greatest threats, or he might drain enough biomass to become truly unstoppable. "Where's the nearest hive fleet?" Valdez asked Artemis 7. "Hive Fleet Leviathan, Segmentum Tempestus, currently consuming the Octarius sector." The tech priest responded immediately. "Estimated biomass, several trillion organisms across 14,000 vessels." Valdez made his decision with the cold certainty that had served him for 4 decades. "We direct him toward Leviathan. 2 apocalypses meet. Perhaps they destroy each other. At minimum, we buy time to prepare a real solution." "And if he survives?" If he drains the Hive fleet and becomes stronger? Hestia asked. Then we deploy the Blackstone fortresses, awaken the Necrons from their tomb worlds, make pacts with demons if necessary. The Imperium has survived 10,000 years by doing whatever was necessary for humanity's survival. This is just another Tuesday. Valdez turned to Hestia. You can convince him to hunt the Tyranids? I can try. But understand, when Galactus fights the hive mind, we're watching two forces of nature collide. The collateral damage will be measured in systems, not worlds. Acceptable, Valdez said without hesitation. The Emperor protects, and if he doesn't, we'll do it ourselves. Hestia returned to Galactus, who had been analyzing the Inquisitorial fleet with growing impatience. The warships hadn't attacked yet, which suggested some level of strategic thinking. Interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. If they became obstacles, he would drain their energy and move on. The Inquisitor has offered information, Hestia said carefully. There's a Xenos species that consumes worlds as you do, the Tyranids. They're biological rather than cosmic, but their total biomass exceeds anything you've encountered in this universe. Trillions of organisms, all connected through a psychic hive mind. Galactus's interest sharpened. A species that consumed worlds successfully despite this universe's strange physics. They must have adapted to the warp-materium duality. Studying them, or better yet consuming them, might provide the key to efficient feeding. Show me these Tyranids, he commanded. Hestia provided the coordinates, knowing she was condemning trillions of Tyranid organisms while potentially saving trillions of humans. The moral calculus made her sick, but her herald nature compelled service. She was becoming the weapon she'd feared, a guide who led apocalypse to the Imperium's enemies. As Galactus prepared to travel toward the Octarius sector, he failed to notice several critical details. First, the Inquisitorial fleet was discreetly deploying observation satellites to track his movements. Second, a series of Eldar webway portals had opened and closed in his wake, Farseers gathering data for some larger plan. Third, deep in the tomb world of Solemnes, Trazyn the Infinite had begun mobilizing Necron fleets with one singular purpose: acquire this cosmic being for his collection, even if it meant deploying weapons that hadn't been activated in 60 million years. And finally, in the warp itself, the four Chaos gods watched with growing frustration. Galactus couldn't be corrupted. He couldn't be tempted. He barely acknowledged their existence. This was unacceptable. Everything served chaos eventually. Everything had a weakness. The gods began to plot, each according to their nature. Khorne saw a warrior to be defeated in glorious combat. Nurgle saw an immortal being whose hunger mirrored decay and entropy. Tzeentch saw a cosmic equation that needed solving. And Slaanesh saw the ultimate challenge, a being whose only desire was sustenance, pure and absolute. If Galactus couldn't be corrupted, then perhaps his herald could be. Hestia Varn still retained her humanity, her emotions, her faith. And where humanity existed, chaos could take root. The game was just beginning, and Galactus was moving exactly where multiple powers wanted him, toward a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy, regardless of who won. The journey toward the Octarius sector took 14 days through real space. Galactus refused to enter the warp. His cosmic senses detected the Imperium as a realm of pure chaos that would make maintaining his physical integrity difficult at best. Instead, he moved through conventional space at velocities that bent physics, his cosmic power propelling him faster than any Imperial vessel, while Hestia guided him along navigator routes she remembered from her previous life. during those 14 days, the galaxy mobilized. The Inquisition established a monitoring network spanning 17 sectors, tracking Galactus's progress and preparing contingency plans that ranged from deploy forbidden archaeotech to negotiate with Necrons for reality-ending weapons. Inquisitor Lord Valdez personally oversaw the awakening of 3 Blackstone fortresses, ancient space stations of unknowable origin capable of manipulating the warp itself. If Galactus survived the Tyranids, humanity needed weapons that could actually threaten him. On Mars, the Fabricator General called an emergency conclave of the Mechanicus's highest-ranking magi. Tech Priest Artemis VII presented his findings. The entity designated Galactus Prime represented technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from divine intervention. Several radical factions immediately declared him the Omnissiah's herald, while conservative elements demanded his destruction as an abomination against the machine god. The political schism threatened to tear the Mechanicus apart before anyone agreed on a unified response. In the Eye of Terror, Abaddon the Despoiler abandoned his latest Black Crusade preparations to focus on the Devourer. Chaos sorcerers worked around the clock, attempting to develop rituals that could corrupt, bind, or destroy an entity that had already rejected the Dark God's offer. The most promising theory came from a mad prophet of Tzeentch. If Galactus couldn't be changed, perhaps reality around him could be altered until he had no choice but to serve chaos. And across dozens of craft worlds, Eldar Farseers consulted the runes obsessively. Eldrad Ulthrin had reached a disturbing conclusion. Galactus's arrival wasn't random. The warp storm that brought him had formed at a nexus point where multiple prophecies intersected. Someone, or something, had deliberately pulled him into this universe. The question was who and why. But the most interesting response came from an unexpected source. Deep in the Ghoul stars, beyond the Astronomican's light, a Necron fleet activated after 60 million years of hibernation. Trazyn the Infinite had made his decision. Galactus would join his collection, willingly or otherwise. To that end, he'd requisitioned technology that even the Silent King had forbidden. Weapons from the war in heaven that had broken gods and shattered reality. If Galactus truly was a cosmic entity of fundamental importance, then he deserved to be preserved for eternity in Trazyn's galleries. Trazyn dispatched his fleet toward the Octarius sector. Whatever happened between Galactus and the Tyranids, the Infinite would be there to claim his prize. Galactus, unaware of these machinations, focused on his approaching meal. His cosmic awareness detected the Tyranid presence from 3 systems away, a psychic pressure unlike anything in his experience. The hive mind wasn't a single consciousness, but a distributed intelligence spanning trillions of organisms. It registered as both living and not living, biological and somehow more, as if the Tyranids existed on a conceptual level beyond mere flesh. Hestia felt it too through her herald senses, and the sensation terrified her. They know we're coming. The hive mind is already adapting, creating new bioforms specifically to counter whatever threat it senses. Adaptation is irrelevant, Galactus stated. They are biomass. I will consume them. They emerged into the Octarius system, and Hestia immediately understood why the Imperium had written this entire sector off as lost. The space around the primary world was thick with Tyranid bioships, living vessels the size of Imperial cruisers, each containing thousands of warrior organisms. The fleet numbered in the tens of thousands, with more arriving through real space every hour. Below, the planet's surface writhed with Tyranid presence. Every square kilometer transformed into digestion pools where consumed biomass was rendered down to base nutrients. Galactus observed the harvest with something approaching professional interest. The Tyranids had solved the feeding problem he faced. They consumed matter completely, breaking it down to molecular components and repurposing everything. No waste, no resistance. Total efficiency. If he could replicate their adaptation to this universe's physics, his feeding difficulties would end. The hive mind noticed him the moment he arrived. For a brief instant, the psychic gestalt that controlled trillions of organisms paused in its consumption. It analyzed this new arrival, categorizing it through alien thought processes. Not prey, not threat, something else. Entity that hungers like hive. Hungers. Possible new biomass pattern? Then the hive mind attacked with the casual totality of an apex predator eliminating competition. Bioships accelerated toward Galactus, launching swarms of boarding spores, living projectiles containing thousands of warrior organisms bred for ship-to-ship combat. Simultaneously, the hive mind deployed its psychic presence, a crushing mental weight that had broken the minds of entire Imperial battle fleets. The dual assault, physical and psychic, represented the Tyranids' answer to this universe's warp-materium duality. They attacked both dimensions simultaneously. Galactus raised one hand and released cosmic energy in a directed beam. The power cosmic struck the leading bioships, and they simply ceased to exist. Not exploded or destroyed, but atomized so completely that not even debris remained. 20 vessels died in the first second, their component biomass converted to energy that Galactus absorbed. And for the first time since arriving in this universe, the feeding worked efficiently. Tyranid biomass, unlike planetary ecosystems, carried no psychic resistance. The hive mind's consciousness existed in the warp, but the physical organisms were pure matter unmarred by faith or corruption. Galactus could drain them completely, converting their substance to energy with the same efficiency he'd enjoyed in his native universe. He pulled harder, extending his cosmic awareness to encompass the entire biofleet. Hundreds of ships began to wither as he drew their life force into himself. The Tyranids died by millions. Warriors, genestealers, carnifexes, all the myriad bioforms collapsing as their cellular structure failed. The energy flooded into Galactus, replenishing reserves that had been depleting since his arrival. But the hive mind adapted. New bioships emerged from the planet's surface, these ones sporting carapace modifications that dispersed energy rather than absorbing it. The Tyranids couldn't stop Galactus's drain completely, but they could make it less efficient, forcing him to work harder for each joule of stolen life. Simultaneously, the hive mind deployed new organisms bred specifically to counter cosmic-scale threats. Void krakens, massive creatures that existed partially in the warp and could theoretically grapple with Galactus directly. A void kraken the size of a battle station lunged from behind a shattered moon, its tentacles wrapping around Galactus's torso. The creature was designed to drain psychic energy from its prey. Essentially, it was attempting to feed on Galactus, the way Galactus fed on worlds. For 3 full seconds, the two cosmic predators locked in a contest of mutual consumption. The void kraken drained energy through its tentacles while Galactus pulled back twice as hard. The organism's biology was extraordinarily resilient, evolved through countless generations to survive the most hostile environments. But it wasn't designed to face something like Galactus. The void kraken died, its entire biomass converted to energy in less than a minute. Galactus absorbed it and immediately felt the difference. This organism had possessed more concentrated energy than 10,000 lesser Tyranids. The hive mind was creating specialized threats, which meant it was creating specialized food sources. He's winning. Hestia whispered from her position at Galactus's side. Part of her, the Imperial part, felt horror at watching trillions of organisms die. Another part, the Herald, felt satisfaction at watching her master feed successfully for the first time. But she also recognized something the hive mind hadn't yet understood. Galactus wasn't just feeding, he was learning. Every organism he consumed provided data about Tyranid biology, their adaptation mechanisms, their psychic resonance patterns. He was reverse engineering their solution to this universe's physics, integrating it into his own cosmic metabolism. The hive mind realized its mistake approximately 4 minutes into the battle. This entity wasn't just another threat to be eliminated or biomass to be consumed. It was a competitor, a rival apex predator that learned from consumption just as the hive did. Every Tyranid organism Galactus devoured made him better adapted to fighting Tyranids. The hive mind made a decision that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. Retreat. Bioships began disengaging, pulling back toward the system's edge. Not fleeing. Tyranids didn't flee, but executing a tactical withdrawal to preserve biomass while the hive mind developed a more comprehensive counter-strategy. The planet below began launching spores into deep space, each containing genetic templates for new bioforms designed specifically to counter this cosmic threat. But Galactus wasn't allowing retreat. He accelerated toward the planet itself, recognizing it as the true prize. The digestion pools covering the surface contained more concentrated biomass than existed in the entire biofleet. Billions of tons of rendered organic matter waiting to be repurposed into new Tyranid organisms. No, Hestia said, sudden understanding flooding through her. If you drain the planet, you'll absorb Tyranid genetic data directly. You'll integrate their adaptation mechanisms. You'll become better adapted to this universe, Galactus finished. Yes. He reached the planet's surface and began the deepest feeding he'd attempted since arriving in the 41st millennium. The digestion pools contained pure biomass, unmarred by psychic interference. It was the closest thing to an ideal meal he'd found in this universe. The energy flowed into him smoothly, efficiently, wonderfully. But he was also absorbing something else. The genetic memory encoded in Tyranid biomatter. Information about how organisms adapted to the warp's influence, how they metabolized in this universe's unique physics, how they consumed and evolved across countless millennia. Galactus's form began to change. Subtly at first, his energy signature shifting, becoming more compatible with this universe's laws. Then, more dramatically, portions of his cosmic structure adopting quasi-biological patterns, integrating Tyranid adaptation mechanisms into his fundamental nature. He was becoming a hybrid. Cosmic entity meets ultimate biological predator. And watching from the system's edge through scrying technology, multiple powers recognized the horrifying truth simultaneously. Inquisitor Valdez saw it. Eldrad Ulthron saw it. Trazin the Infinite saw it. Even the Chaos Gods saw it and felt something approaching concern. They hadn't unleashed two apocalypses on each other, hoping one would win. They'd accidentally created something worse, a devourer who now understood how to feed efficiently in the 41st millennium. The transformation completed over the course of 6 hours, during which Galactus consumed 40% of the Tyranid biomass in the Octarius system. When he finally released the planet, it hung in space as a lifeless gray sphere, its digestion pools drained to bedrock, its atmosphere stripped away. 3 trillion Tyranid organisms had died, their essence absorbed into something that was no longer quite Galactus as he had been. His form remained largely the same. The towering humanoid shape, the executioner's helm, the cosmic presence that bent reality around him. But close examination revealed subtle changes. His surface now shifted between states more fluidly, adopting quasi-biological patterns when efficient, reverting to pure cosmic energy when necessary. His energy signature had harmonized with this universe's warp-materium duality, no longer fighting against the dimensional overlay, but flowing through it naturally. Most critically, he had learned the Tyranids' secret: consume everything. Not just the physical matter, but the psychic resonance, the warp presence, even the informational patterns encoded in genetic memory. Leave nothing behind. Waste nothing. The inefficiency that had plagued his feeding since arrival had been solved through forced evolution. Hestia felt the change through her herald bond and understood immediately that the galaxy's strategic situation had shifted catastrophically. "You've adapted," she said, unable to keep the dread from her voice. "Human worlds won't be able to resist you anymore. The faith-based psychic interference that saved Thessia Prime, you can consume through it now." "Correct," Galactus confirmed. His voice carried new harmonics, as if multiple organisms spoke in perfect unison beneath the cosmic authority. "This universe's rules are now comprehensible. Feeding will proceed efficiently." Before Hestia could respond, spatial ruptures tore open across the system. Not warp tears, but something cleaner, mathematical precision made manifest. Necron vessels emerged from dimensional pockets, their living metal hulls reflecting starlight with unnatural perfection. 20 cruisers, 5 battleships, and at the center, a vessel that registered on cosmic sensors as something far more dangerous. Trazyn, the Infinite's flagship, the Archivist's prize. Trazyn materialized on the bridge of his flagship, his mechanical form the epitome of Necron craftsmanship. For 60 million years, he had collected the galaxy's most significant artifacts, preserving them in stasis fields for eternity. He had claimed the last of the Eldari Phoenix Lords, stolen a fully functional STC from under the Mechanicus's nose, and once kidnapped an entire Imperial Guard regiment mid-battle. Galactus would be his greatest acquisition yet. Unknown entity, Trazyn broadcast across all frequencies, his voice carrying the flat certainty of a being who had outlived empires. "You have demonstrated capabilities worthy of preservation. I am Trazyn, Archaeovist of Salamis, and I offer you a choice. Join my collection willingly, or I will employ methods that leave you no alternative. Your existence is too significant to be wasted on mere consumption." Galactus regarded the Necron fleet with the same cosmic indifference he applied to all threats. "You are mechanisms, lifeless. You possess no energy worth consuming. You are irrelevant." "Irrelevant?" Trazyn's voice carried something approaching offense. "I commanded legions when your universe was still gestating in cosmic foam. I have technologies that reshape reality on fundamental levels. And I have waited 60 million years for a specimen of your caliber." He transmitted a command code, and his fleet activated weapons that hadn't been deployed since the War in Heaven. The Necron vessels unleashed aeonic orbs, devices that didn't merely destroy matter, but erased it from temporal continuity. The orb struck Galactus's form and detonated, attempting to remove him from existence across past, present, and future simultaneously. For the first time since arriving in the 41st Millennium, Galactus felt pain. The temporal weapons attacked him on a level deeper than physical matter or cosmic energy. They targeted his existence itself, trying to retroactively prevent him from ever having arrived in this universe. His cosmic nature resisted. He was fundamental, a law of his native reality. But the Necron technology was designed to break laws. For 3 agonizing seconds, Galactus felt portions of his timeline fracture and dissolve. Then, his newly acquired Tyranid adaptation mechanisms activated. The biological component of his transformed nature provided something he'd lacked before: redundancy. Like Tyranid bioforms that could regenerate from minimal tissue samples, Galactus's existence now existed across multiple states simultaneously. The temporal weapons couldn't erase him completely because he no longer existed in a single timeline. His presence had become distributed, quantum, impossible to fully remove. He retaliated with focused cosmic energy, beams that struck the Necron vessels with the fury of collapsing stars. The living metal hulls resisted impressively. Necron technology was designed to survive universe-ending catastrophes. But Galactus had consumed enough Tyranid biomass to understand adaptation at a level that transcended mere engineering. He didn't just attack the ships. He attacked the fundamental principles that allowed Necron technology to function. The Archivist's prize buckled as its defensive systems encountered something they weren't designed to resist: cosmic energy that evolved mid-attack, shifting frequencies to bypass shields, changing wavelengths to exploit vulnerabilities that emerged in real time. Galactus was applying Tyranid adaptive principles to his power cosmic, creating a hybrid assault that this universe had never witnessed before. Fascinating, Trazyn observed, even as his flagship's hull began to fail. You learn, you integrate, you become more than you were. This changes my collection parameters significantly. The Necron Overlord transmitted another command, and the fleet deployed their final weapon, a celestial orrery fragment. The orrery was a legendary device that mapped every star in the galaxy, allowing its operators to extinguish suns with a mere gesture. Trazyn had acquired a piece of this reality-altering technology, specifically for acquisitions that proved difficult. The fragment activated, and Galactus felt the star at the center of the Octarius system begin to die. Not naturally, but artificially. Its fusion reactions disrupted on a fundamental level, its lifespan compressed from billions of years to seconds. The star collapsed inward, preparing to go supernova. It was a hostage situation scaled to cosmic proportions. The star's death would sterilize the entire system, destroying both the remaining Tyranid biomass and Galactus himself. Trazyn was essentially threatening mutual destruction unless Galactus submitted to collection. But Trazyn had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed Galactus feared death. He assumed the entity would prioritize survival over principle. He didn't understand that Galactus was hunger given cosmic form, a force of nature that didn't negotiate, didn't compromise, and most critically, saw the dying star not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Galactus turned his attention to the collapsing star and began to feed. Stars contained more energy than 1,000 planets. Galactus had consumed stellar mass before in his native universe, though it was inefficient compared to planetary biospheres. But here, with his new adaptation mechanisms, with Tyranid-derived ability to consume across dimensional barriers, he found the dying star remarkably palatable. The collapsing fusion reactions, the erupting solar flares, the catastrophic energy release of a star in its death throes, all of it flowed into Galactus. He drained the supernova before it could fully form, pulling its energy inward rather than allowing it to explode outward. The star didn't die so much as it was consumed. Its stellar mass converted to cosmic energy that replenished Galactus completely. For the first time since arriving in the 41st Millennium, Galactus was truly satiated. His form expanded, growing in both physical size and cosmic presence. The energy from a dying star, combined with trillions of Tyranid organisms, had restored him to full strength and then exceeded it. He was no longer the starving entity that had desperately clawed at Thessia Prime's biosphere. He was Galactus the Devourer, operating at peak capacity in a universe that now made sense to him. Transcend the infinite, calculated odds with mechanical precision, and reached an uncomfortable conclusion. He couldn't capture this entity. Not now. Perhaps not ever. But the data he'd collected, the temporal weapon interactions, the adaptation mechanisms, the stellar consumption, was valuable enough to justify tactical withdrawal. Your performance has been adequately documented, Transcend transmitted with the dignity of someone pretending a planned retreat. I shall return when you are more manageable. Do try not to consume anything truly irreplaceable before then. The Necron fleet phased out of reality, disappearing into dimensional pockets with characteristic efficiency. Transcend had lost the immediate engagement, but gained invaluable data. And in 60 million years of existence, he'd learned that patience always outlasted power. Galactus ignored the Necron retreat, focusing instead on his transformed state. He was stronger now than when he'd arrived. More importantly, he understood this universe's rules. The warp-materium duality that had seemed so alien was now comprehensible. He could feed on human worlds without the debilitating resistance. He could consume Xeno's civilizations completely. He could even drain stars if planetary feeding proved inefficient. The galaxy had just become his feeding ground in truth, not merely in theory. Hestia felt the shift in her herald bond and realized with horror that her plan, guide Galactus to the Tyranids, hope they destroy each other, had catastrophically backfired. Instead of weakening him, the encounter had made him stronger. And now she was bound to a cosmic entity operating at full capacity with complete understanding of how to feed in this universe. What happens now? She asked, dreading the answer. Galactus surveyed the galaxy through his cosmic awareness, perceiving millions of viable feeding targets where before he'd seen only complications and resistance. Hive worlds teeming with trillions of humans, orc empires spanning entire sectors, Eldar craft worlds that moved between stars, Tau colonies spreading their philosophy, chaos demon worlds that existed half in the warp, and countless dead systems where he could consume stars without resistance. Now, Galactus stated with the certainty of fundamental law, I feed properly. And across the galaxy, every faction that had been monitoring the Octarius engagement simultaneously reached the same conclusion. Galactus wasn't just a threat anymore. He was the threat. The Tyranids had been a manageable apocalypse, predictable, slow-moving, containable. Chaos was dangerous, but ultimately self-limiting through its own contradictions. Even the Necron awakening represented a threat that could be negotiated with or fought using established doctrine. But Galactus was something else entirely. An apocalypse that learned, that adapted, that became more efficient with every feeding. And he had just announced his intention to consume the galaxy systematically. The Imperium's High Lords called an emergency session. The Chaos Gods convened a demonic council. The Eldar Farseers began the most desperate scrying session in their species' history. Even the Silent King, Supreme Lord of the Necrons, stirred from his exile beyond the galaxy's edge upon receiving Transcend's report. Everyone understood. If Galactus wasn't stopped, nothing in the 41st millennium would survive. Not the Imperium, not Chaos, not the Xenos, nothing. The galaxy's eternal war had found a common enemy at last. The question was whether ancient hatreds could be set aside long enough to face extinction together, or whether millennia of conflict had made cooperation impossible even in the face of oblivion. The emergency meeting took place on a neutral space station that technically shouldn't have existed. The Conclave of Last Resort was an ancient facility predating the Age of Strife, constructed during humanity's first golden age when the species still believed cooperation was possible. It had been maintained in secret by successive inquisitors for 10,000 years, kept ready for a crisis that exceeded even the Imperium's legendary xenophobia. That crisis had arrived. Inquisitor Lord Valdez stood in the central chamber, surrounded by holograms representing the galaxy's most powerful factions. To his right flickered the image of Farseer Eldrad Ulthran of Craftworld Ulthway, the Eldar's ancient face showing concern that transcended species boundaries. To his left materialized the spectral form of Abaddon the Despoiler, Chaos's greatest champion, grudgingly attending because even the dark gods recognized extinction when it approached. This meeting violates approximately 7,000 Imperial laws, Valdez stated flatly. I expect half the parties present to attempt betrayal within the hour. But before that happens, we need to address the fact that Galactus consumed a star yesterday and is currently heading toward the Armageddon sector. Population: 100 billion humans across 6 hive worlds. The Orcs will provide resistance, rumbled a transmission from Warboss Guzgkul Mag Uruk Thraka, who had been invited purely for his tactical genius and intimate knowledge of Armageddon's defenses. The boys love a good scrap, but dis git don't scrap. He just eats. Dat ain't proper. The entity has achieved complete adaptation to this universe's physics, added tech priest Dominus Cowell, attending via Mechanicus secure channel. My calculations suggest that at current consumption rates, he will depopulate the Imperium within 300 years. Faster if he begins targeting fortress worlds or Terra itself. Eldrad Ulthran spoke with the weight of millennia. The runes show possible futures, and in 97% of castings, we see nothing. Void, absence, not death, consumption so complete that even the possibility of those futures ceases to exist. The Devourer doesn't just kill civilizations, he erases them from the pattern of creation. Then we kill him, Abaddon stated with characteristic directness. The Imperium has planet-killing weapons. The Necrons possess technology that breaks reality. Chaos can deploy demonic legions without limit. Combined, surely we possess sufficient force. We tried, interjected a hollow voice. Trazin the Infinite, attending via remote proxy. I deployed temporal weapons designed to erase entities from existence. They failed. The Devourer has integrated Tyranid adaptation mechanisms. He evolves faster than we can develop counters. Any weapon we deploy, he will learn to resist or consume. Silence fell across the chamber as that reality settled over the assembled representatives. They were discussing an enemy that couldn't be killed through conventional means, couldn't be corrupted, couldn't be negotiated with, and grew stronger with each victory. It was every faction's nightmare scenario made manifest. There is one option, Valdez said carefully. Though it violates every principle the Imperium holds sacred. We have Captain Hestia Varn, transformed into Galactus's herald. She maintains dual loyalty, bound to serve him while retaining faith in the Emperor. If we can exploit that connection. You're suggesting assassination from within, Eldrad observed. A herald granted cosmic power used to strike at her master. Poetic. Tragically unlikely to succeed, but poetic. I'm suggesting we give her a weapon that can actually threaten him, Valdez clarified. The Mechanicus has been researching archaeotech recovered from the dark age of technology. There are devices we don't fully understand, built using principles that predate the Imperium. If we can weaponize one and deliver it through the Herald, the risk is catastrophic. Call interrupted. Dark Age weapons were banned for reasons our ancestors documented extensively. Some unmake matter. Others breach dimensional barriers. A few literally rewrite causality. Deploying such technology could be worse than Galactus himself. Then we're discussing degrees of apocalypse, Abaddon said with grim humor. The Imperium's apocalypse versus the certain apocalypse. I've made worse choices. Meanwhile, Galactus approached the Armageddon sector with Hestia at his side. The Herald could feel her master's satisfaction through their bond. He was finally operating as intended, no longer hampered by inefficiency or universal incompatibility. The Tyranid encounter had transformed him into something perfectly adapted to this galaxy. Now he would demonstrate what a properly functioning Devourer could accomplish. Armageddon is a war world, Hestia said, desperately searching for any argument that might divert him. Its population is militarized. Orcs control half the planet. The Defenders have held against 3 separate Orc invasions. They won't die quietly. Their resistance is irrelevant, Galactus responded. I have consumed worlds defended by civilizations more advanced than this Imperium. I have drained planets protected by gods. Armageddon will fall like all others. But as they approached the system, Hestia's cosmic senses detected something unexpected. The Armageddon sector wasn't preparing to defend itself conventionally. Instead, massive energy readings suggested they were activating something old, something powerful, something that predated the current conflict. On Armageddon Prime, in a vault buried beneath the planet's crust, Commissar Yarrick supervised the activation of a weapon his predecessors had sworn would never be used. The Ordinatus Armageddon, a Dark Age device so powerful that its very existence was classified beyond top secret. According to recovered schematics, it could crack continents, boil oceans, or theoretically destabilize a planet's core. This will kill millions, one of Yarrick's subordinates protested. We'll destroy the planet we're trying to save. Galactus will kill billions, Yarrick countered with iron certainty. We sacrifice Armageddon to wound him badly enough that the galaxy can finish the job. The Emperor demands this of us. The Ordinatus powered up, drawing energy from the planet's geothermal core. It would take 6 hours to reach full charge, at which point it would release a beam of concentrated energy that theoretically could threaten even a cosmic entity. Theoretically. The weapon had never been tested at full power. Its creators had feared what it might do. Galactus detected the energy buildup as he entered orbit and analyzed it with his enhanced understanding of this universe's physics. A weapon, primitive by cosmic standards, but surprisingly well designed. If it struck him at full power, it might actually inflict damage. Not fatal damage, but enough to be genuinely inconvenient. He decided to test something he'd been theorizing since consuming the star in the Octarius system. If he could drain stellar mass, could he drain artificial energy sources? Could he consume weapons before they fired? Galactus reached out with his cosmic awareness toward the Ordinatus Armageddon, analyzing its structure. Power cells, fusion reactors, geothermal taps, all sources of concentrated energy, all vulnerable to consumption. He began to drain them remotely, pulling power from the weapon before it could be deployed. On the planet's surface, Yarrick watched in horror as the Ordinatus's power levels began dropping precipitously. He's feeding on it, the Commissar whispered. Emperor's mercy, he's draining the weapon itself. Yarrick made a decision in that moment that defined his legacy. If the weapon couldn't be used against Galactus, it could still be used for one purpose: denial. He overrode the safety protocols and triggered a catastrophic overload. The Ordinatus wouldn't fire, it would detonate, releasing all its accumulated energy in a single devastating explosion. "Evacuate the southern continent," Yarrick ordered calmly. "We have 8 minutes. Make peace with the Emperor." The Ordinatus exploded with a force that dwarfed nuclear weapons. The southern continent of Armageddon vaporized. Billions of tons of rock and steel converted to superheated plasma. The explosion registered across the entire sector, visible as a brief new star born and dying in seconds. Galactus absorbed approximately 70% of the detonation's energy before it could dissipate uselessly into space. The rest created a crater visible from orbit and killed everything within 1,000 kilometers. Yarrick died instantly, along with 3 billion other humans and roughly the same number of orcs who'd been fighting in the southern war zones. But the sacrifice accomplished its goal. Galactus had gained energy from the explosion, but he'd lost the planet. Armageddon's biosphere was so badly damaged that consuming it further would yield minimal returns. The humans had essentially scorched the Earth, denying him his meal through self-destruction. Hestia felt the distant deaths through her cosmic awareness and wanted to weep. 3 billion lives, more than had existed on some entire worlds, sacrificed just to deny Galactus a single feeding. And the terrifying part was that it had worked. If every world did this, if every population chose death over consumption, Galactus would starve again. "They'll do this everywhere now," she said quietly. "You've forced them into a strategic calculation. Die quickly by self-destruction or die slowly by consumption. Humans choose quick deaths. They always have." Galactus considered this. A universe where prey destroyed itself rather than be consumed was problematic. It suggested he needed to change tactics, feed faster, strike worlds before they could activate doomsday weapons, or find targets that couldn't self-destruct. "Show me worlds that cannot destroy themselves," he commanded Hestia. "Dead worlds, primitive worlds, anything that lacks the technology for strategic suicide." Hestia felt the compulsion, but resisted with everything she had. "No, I won't guide you to defenseless populations. If I'm damned for being your herald, I'll at least be damned with some dignity." The refusal surprised Galactus. His herald was defective, retaining free will when she should have been completely subservient. In his native universe, heralds eventually either accepted their role or went mad from the contradiction. Here, this human seemed capable of maintaining cognitive dissonance indefinitely. "You will serve," Galactus stated, "or I will create a new herald from less resistant material." "Then do it," Hestia challenged. "Transform someone else. But know that every human you transform will resist. Faith in the Emperor runs deep. You'll never have a loyal herald in this universe." Before Galactus could respond, spatial tears opened across the system. Not 1 or 2, but hundreds. A coordinated assault from multiple factions simultaneously. Chaos warships emerged from the warp. Eldar vessels phased from the webway. Even Necron ships appeared, their presence suggesting Trazyn had been persuaded to participate in a coordinated strike. And leading them all was a vessel that made even Galactus pause. A Blackstone fortress, one of the Imperium's most powerful weapons, its reality-warping capabilities charged to maximum. The galaxy had decided that if Galactus couldn't be reasoned with or starved into submission, he would have to be destroyed through overwhelming force. Every major faction was committing resources to this battle, their ancient hatred temporarily shelved in the face of extinction. The siege of the Armageddon sector had begun, and it would determine whether the 41st Millennium could unite against a common threat, or whether its endless wars had made cooperation impossible, even in the face of oblivion. The void around Armageddon became a killing field of impossible scale. Chaos battleships vomited demonic boarding parties that phased through reality to claw at Galactus's cosmic form. Eldar vessels danced at the edge of the engagement, their pulsar lances striking with surgical precision at energy convergence points Trazyn had identified. The single Blackstone fortress, commanded by Inquisitor Valdez himself, began to hum with power that made the warp itself recoil. This was not a battle for territory or ideology. It was an extermination. Galactus responded with the cold efficiency of a natural disaster. He did not rage or strategize. He simply acted. A wave of cosmic force erupted from him, striking the Chaos Fleet first. Demon ships that had weathered millennia of Imperial bombardment simply unraveled, their warp-tainted essence providing a strangely satisfying burst of energy as Galactus consumed them. The never-born screams of demons being unmade echoed through the Imperium, a sound so horrifying that even the Chaos Gods paused in their eternal scheming. "He's feeding on us," Abaddon roared from the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, his Black Crusade flagship. "He's turning our own power against us. All vessels, focus fire. Drown him in raw warp energy." 1,000 Chaos ships channeled the power of the Imperium, creating a tidal wave of pure madness meant to overwhelm Galactus's senses. It was a tactic that had broken entire Space Marine chapters and driven Imperial battle fleets to self-destruction. Galactus absorbed it. The swirling, chaotic energy, anathema to all natural law, was filtered through his newly adapted biology. The Tyranid-derived mechanisms within him processed the warp energy, stripping it of its sentient malevolence and converting it to usable power. It was inefficient, like eating poison and relying on a supreme constitution to survive, but it worked. The warp tide receded, and Galactus stood stronger for it. "The Blackstone, now," Valdez commanded. The ancient fortress activated. Its primary weapon did not fire lasers or plasma, but a beam of focused anti-reality. It was a weapon designed not to kill, but to unmake, striking at the fundamental concept of its target's existence. The beam hit Galactus square in the chest. For a moment, it seemed to work. Portions of his form flickered, becoming translucent, insubstantial. A cheer went up across the Allied fleet. They had found his weakness. Then Galactus began to learn. The anti-reality beam was a new data set, a novel attack vector. His adaptive systems, supercharged by Tyranid evolution, analyzed the weapon's principles in nanoseconds. He understood it not as a threat, but as a lesson in this universe's more esoteric physics. His form solidified, the flickering stopped, and he began to generate a counter-frequency, a field of stabilized reality that neutralized the Blackstone's beam. "He's adapting to the Blackstone!" Eldred Ulthran's voice was tight with a fear he had not felt in millennia. "No single weapon will work twice. We must strike with everything, simultaneously, and hope the cumulative damage is enough." The Allied fleet surged forward in a final, desperate charge. Necron ionic orbs phased into existence around Galactus. Eldar ships unleashed their most destructive psychic sorceries. The remaining Chaos vessels rammed him in suicidal demonic fury. The Blackstone fortress fired again and again, its ancient structure groaning under the strain. Galactus was at the center of a storm of annihilation. He consumed, he adapted, he retaliated. But for the first time, he was forced to devote energy to defense. A Necron chrono weapon erased a fraction of his timeline before he adapted. A direct hit from the Blackstone scorched his armor. The cumulative pressure was immense. It was in this moment of supreme focus that Hestia acted. The compulsion to serve Galactus was a fire in her veins. But the sight of the galaxy uniting, Imperium, Chaos, Xenos, all setting aside eternal war for common survival, ignited something deeper. It was the embodiment of the imperial ideal she had always believed in. Humanity's stubborn refusal to die. She would not be the tool that ended that. She had no physical weapon, but she had the power cosmic, and she had her own unyielding will. As Galactus raised a hand to obliterate the Blackstone fortress, Hestia turned her herald's power inward. She did not attack him. Such a direct assault would be futile. Instead, she focused on the one thing that connected her to him, the herald bond itself. A conduit of cosmic energy, meant for communication and control. She poured every ounce of her being, every memory of her life, every shred of her faith in the Emperor and humanity, into that bond, and then severed it. The effect was not explosive, but profoundly disruptive. It was like a vital organ suddenly failing. The feedback of a bonded herald's soul being willingly destroyed, not just killed, but self-annihilated through an act of pure sacrifice, created a psychic and cosmic shockwave that Galactus had no defense against, because it was not an attack. It was a void, a sudden screaming silence, where a part of his own power had been. Galactus staggered. It was a tiny motion, barely perceptible on his cosmic scale. But for the entities watching, it was a seismic event. The invulnerable Devourer had flinched. The unmaking beam from the Blackstone fortress, no longer being neutralized as efficiently, struck him again. This time, it left a visible crack in his chest plate. Cosmic energy, the lifeblood of his being, began to leak into the void. "He's wounded," Valdez screamed over the Vox. "All forces, concentrate fire on the breach, now. For the Emperor, for your own survival, now." The Allied fleet, recognizing the opening, unleashed their entire arsenal upon the crack in Galactus's armor. The concentrated fire of 1,000 warships. The reality-bending power of the Blackstone, the temporal weapons of the Necrons, all funneled into that single point of vulnerability. Galactus roared, and the sound shattered planets in nearby systems. He swatted aside entire battle groups, consuming ships whole to replenish the energy he was losing. But the wound, catalyzed by Hestia's sacrifice, would not close. The galaxy combined might was finally, truly hurting him. He was not defeated. He was still Galactus, a force of nature. But he was now, undeniably, bleeding. He made a calculation. Continuing this engagement was inefficient. The prey had united and had proven capable of inflicting meaningful damage. To stay was to risk true destruction, or, almost as bad, starvation from the energy expended. With a final, contemptuous blast of cosmic power that forced the Allied fleet back, Galactus turned and moved. Not toward another Imperial world, but toward the one place in the galaxy where the rules were already broken, where the warp bled freely into reality, and where the psychic static of faith was drowned out by the screams of demons. He was heading for the Eye of Terror, a place of infinite chaos, infinite energy, and no possibility of the organized, faith-based resistance that had proven so problematic. A place where he could feed without interruption and heal his wound. The Allied fleet, battered and bleeding, did not pursue. They had won the battle, driven him back. But they all knew the truth. They hadn't killed the Devourer. They had merely forced him to change his feeding ground. And by driving him into the Eye of Terror, they might have just unleashed him upon their single most powerful enemy, or given him the one thing he needed to become truly unstoppable. On the bridge of the Blackstone Fortress, Inquisitor Valdez looked at the spot where Hestia Varn had died. He made the sign of the Aquila. "The Emperor protects," he whispered, the words feeling inadequate for the sacrifice he had just witnessed. "But it seems we must also protect ourselves." The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, had already torn the galaxy in half. But the wound Galactus tore through its fringes as he entered the Eye of Terror was something new. A scar of cosmic order forced upon a realm of pure chaos. The demonic legions that eternally warred within the Eye paused, their conflict forgotten as a predator of an entirely different orders entered their playground. Galactus felt the change immediately. The oppressive, faith-based psychic static of the Imperium was gone, replaced by a cacophony of raw, untamed warp energy. Here, the materium was thin, and the immaterium was thick. It was inefficient, chaotic, and unpredictable, but it was also abundant. There were no populations to resist, no fleets to fight, no doomsday weapons to evade. There was only energy, waiting to be claimed. His wound, the crack in his armor from the Battle of Armageddon, still leaked a faint trickle of cosmic power. It was a constant drain, a vulnerability he could not afford. He needed to feed, deeply and without interruption. He chose his first target, a demon world known as Zaxthor, a planet-sized fortress dedicated to the blood god Khorne. Its surface was a single, endless battlefield where legions of demons and mortal berserkers fought and died in an eternal cycle, their spilled blood and rage fueling the world's very existence. Galactus descended. He did not bother with the armies below. He simply extended his will and began to drain the planet of its essence. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic for the forces of chaos. The ground itself, composed of solidified rage and hatred, began to crumble to gray dust. Khornate warriors, mid-battle scream, found their strength fading, their weapons turning to rust in their hands. Greater demons, beings of immense power, unraveled into screaming vortices of dissipating energy as Galactus consumed the warp stuff that gave them form. He was not just eating the planet. He was eating the concept of the planet, the narrative of endless war that defined it. The energy was potent, laced with a violent purity that his Tyranid-adapted systems processed with brutal efficiency. The crack in his chest plate began to shimmer, the edges slowly knitting together. From his brass citadel, Khorne took notice. This was not honorable combat. This was consumption, theft. The Devourer was not fighting his legions, he was rendering them irrelevant. A rage hotter than 1,000 stars bloomed in the heart of the blood god. The skies of 1,000,000 demon worlds ran red with blood as Khorne directed his infinite legions toward this new, insulting threat. But Galactus was already moving. He finished with Zaxthor, leaving it a barren, silent rock adrift in the warp, and moved to a world dedicated to Tzeentch. Here the landscape shifted in impossible, non-Euclidean patterns, a maze of crystal and magic where reality was a suggestion. Galactus consumed it too, draining the raw potentiality, the endless schemes, the layered deceptions. The energy was complex and tricky, but his adaptive systems learned to filter out the chaotic randomness, absorbing only the pure power beneath. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, was simultaneously infuriated and fascinated. Here was a being that could not be schemed against, because it had no desires to manipulate beyond base hunger. It was a paradox, a static equation in a realm of infinite variables. The great conspirator began 1,000 new plots, not to corrupt Galactus, but to simply understand him. Nurgle and Slanesh watched as Galactus consumed worlds in their domains as well. Plague planets teeming with resilient, decaying life were stripped to sterile bedrock. Worlds of exquisite sensation and perverse pleasure were drained of their emotional excess, leaving behind hollowed-out husks of apathy. The Chaos Gods were faced with an enemy they could not comprehend. They were beings of emotion, desire, and concept. Galactus was a function, a universal constant that had been dropped into their playground. Their usual tools, temptation, corruption, despair, excess, were meaningless. You could not tempt gravity. You could not corrupt entropy. Abaddon the Despoiler watched from the vengeful spirit, his fleet hovering at the edge of the eye. He had followed, hoping to witness Galactus's destruction at the hands of the gods. Instead, he witnessed the unthinkable. The dark gods were being farmed. "He's using them," Abaddon growled, his fists clenching. "He's not fighting them. He's treating the Eye of Terror like a larder." The strategic implications were horrifying. If Galactus could heal himself and replenish his power by consuming the infinite, self-renewing resources of the warp, he would become an unstoppable, self-sustaining engine of consumption. The Imperium's strategy of denial would be useless. He would simply retreat here to feed and grow stronger after every engagement. Meanwhile, outside the Eye, the fragile alliance was fracturing. The immediate threat had receded. With Galactus gone, the ancient hatreds resurfaced with a vengeance. "The Despoiler's fleet is vulnerable," an Imperial Lord Admiral argued. "We have them cornered. We can end the Black Crusades here and now." "The Necrons are still on our flank," another countered. "They see our weakness. This alliance was a temporary measure." Eldrad Ulthran pleaded for reason. "Can you not see? This is what he intends. Division. He weakens us not by direct assault, but by forcing us back into our patterns of conflict. The moment we turn on each other, he will return stronger than before." But his words were lost in the rising tide of paranoia and old animosities. The Necron fleet, its objective complete, phased out without a word. The Eldar, seeing the inevitable, retreated into the webway. The Imperial and Chaos fleets, left staring at each other over the carcass of the Armageddon system, began to re-aim their weapons. Inside the Eye, Galactus felt the last of his wounds seal. The energy of a dozen consumed demon worlds had not only healed him, but had increased his mass, his power. He had integrated the nature of the warp into his being. He now understood the emotional and conceptual currents of this universe as another form of physics to be mastered and consumed. He turned his gaze back toward real space. He could feel the alliance crumbling, the unity shattered. The prey had scattered, believing the threat had passed. They were wrong. The lesson of Armageddon had been learned. He would no longer consume one world at a time, giving them time to unite or self-destruct. He needed a new, more efficient strategy. His cosmic awareness swept across the galaxy, no longer seeking individual planets, but the nexuses of power that sustained its civilizations. The Astronomicon on Terra, a beacon of immense psychic power. The great forge worlds of the Mechanicus, blazing with industrial energy. The core systems of the Toe Empire, pulsing with the belief in their greater good. The webway itself, a network of stabilized reality threading through the warp. He would not eat the leaves. He would consume the roots. Galactus set his course not for a world, but for a star system of supreme strategic and psychic significance. A system whose fall would cripple the Imperium and demonstrate his new, terrifying paradigm. A system that housed a relic of unparalleled power, guarded by the most zealous defenders in the galaxy. He moved toward the sanctified system of Sepra Mundi, home to the Battlefleet Solar and one of the most heavily fortified positions outside Terra itself. But his true target was not the fleet or the world. It was the system's star, which the Mechanicus had, for millennia, been slowly converting into a massive plasma reactor through a Dyson swarm of colossal geoformative engines. He would consume a star they had already begun to process. He would take their greatest work of engineering and use it to fuel the extinction of their species. The Devourer had adapted. The war had just entered its final, catastrophic phase. The sanctified system of Sepra Mundi had not known fear in 10,000 years. As a bastion of Battlefleet Solar, its defenses were second only to Terra itself. Rings of orbital fortresses wider than continents circled its worlds. The system's star, Helios Prime, was encased in a skeletal web of Mechanicus geoformative engines, a Dyson swarm in its infancy, slowly harnessing the star's full output to power the Imperium's heartland. It was a symbol of human ambition, a declaration that even stars could be bent to the Emperor's will. That declaration shattered when Galactus arrived. He did not emerge from the warp. He simply was there, his presence an immediate and violent recalibration of local physics. Auspex screens across the system flared white and died. Vox channels filled with a screaming harmonic that was the sound of his cosmic hunger-given voice. Lord Admiral Karthus of the Sepra Mundi Defense Fleet had exactly 5 seconds to process the tactical readouts before the entity raised a hand toward Helios Prime. "All batteries fire!" Karthus roared, his voice echoing across the flag bridge. "Lances, Nova cannons, everything. He must not touch the star." 1,000 ships, the pride of the Imperial Navy, unleashed a salvo that could have vaporized a sector. Lances of coherent energy capable of piercing continents, plasma torpedoes that burned with the fury of small suns, and the earth-shattering projectiles of Nova cannons converged on the Devourer. Galactus ignored them. The firestorm of Imperial wrath washed over him, their energy absorbed. Their matter disintegrated and added to his growing mass. He was a hole in the universe, and their weapons were simply filling the void. His attention remained fixed on Helios Prime. His fingers closed into a fist. Across the Dyson swarm, 1,000,000 geoformative engines simultaneously overloaded. The Mechanicus's great work, a project millennia in the making, detonated in a chain reaction of silent solar flares. The carefully contained stellar energy, meant to be harvested over aeons, was now a raging, uncontrolled inferno. And Galactus began to drink. He did not consume the star as he had in the Octarius system. That had been a desperate, hungry act. This was a ritual, a declaration, a river of pure plasma, wider than the system's 5th planet, erupted from the star's surface and flowed into his outstretched hand. It was not a transfer of energy. It was the star's very life being siphoned away, its furious heart being stilled by a force even it could not withstand. On the bridge of his flagship, Lord Admiral Karthus watched in religious terror as Helios Prime began to dim. The vibrant yellow-white giant faded to a dull orange, then a sullen red. The light of the Sepra Mundi system was literally going out. The star, his sensor officer whispered, his voice breaking. "It's dying. He's killing the star." Panic, cold and absolute, seized the fleet. They could fight Xenos. They could battle heresy. They could not fight the death of a sun. Galactus grew. With every second, his form expanded, blazing with stolen stellar fire. The power he had gained in the Eye of Terror was now being multiplied 1,000-fold by a star that had been pre-processed for his consumption. The light of the dying sun cast his colossal shadow across the inner planets, the eclipse that heralded the end of everything. It was then that the last, desperate play was made. A single ship, not of Imperial design, phased into real space at the edge of the dying system. It was Trazyn, the Infinite's archivist's prize. But it was not alone. Flanking it were the sleek vessels of craft-world Ulthwé, and, in a shocking display of pragmatism, a single, massive Blackstone fortress. The core of the temporary alliance had reassembled, not to fight Galactus directly, but to enact Eldrad Ulthron's final, terrible plan. "The device is ready, Inquisitor." Eldrad's voice came through the Vox, thin and strained. "Trazyn has provided the housing. The Blackstone provides the power. But the catalyst must be you." On the bridge of the Blackstone Fortress, Inquisitor Valdez stood before a nightmare machine. It was a hybrid of Necron living metal, Eldar wraithbone, and Imperial archaeotech, all wired into the fortress's core. At its center hovered a shard of pure black crystal, a fragment of a Citan, the star god the Necrons had shattered in the war in heaven. The plan was not to kill Galactus. It was to trap him, to use the Citan shard as a cosmic anchor and the combined power of their technologies to create a localized reality bubble, a prison of physics from which not even a Devourer of Worlds could escape. "The moment we activate this, he will know," Valdez said, his hand hovering over the activation rune. "He is occupied," Eldrad replied, his voice grim. "And we will only get one chance." They activated the device. A sphere of absolute stillness erupted from the Blackstone Fortress, expanding at the speed of thought. Where it passed, color faded, sound died, and motion ceased. It was not a stasis field. It was the imposition of a new set of physical laws where nothing, not even cosmic hunger, could function. The edge of the field touched Galactus's foot. He noticed. His consumption of the star ceased instantly. He turned, his eyes burning with the light of the dying Helios Prime. He recognized the technology. He recognized the principle. And for the first time, he recognized a genuine threat of permanent imprisonment. He roared, and the sound shattered the remaining Imperial vessels. He threw a blast of cosmic power at the Blackstone Fortress, but the energy hit the reality bubble and simply stopped. It could not penetrate the new laws he was trapped within. He was being caged. With a final, monumental effort, Galactus reached not for the star, not for his attackers, but for the one thing in this universe that had proven capable of surprising him, of harming him, of defying him. He reached for the memory of the sacrifice. He channeled the last dregs of the dying star's power, the chaotic energy of the warp, and the adaptive essence of the Tyranids. And he focused it all into a single, impossible act. He would not be trapped. He would not be contained. If this universe would not let him feed, he would break its walls. A tear opened in reality before him. But it was not a warp rift. It was something else. Something that smelled of another physics, another set of stars, another reality where the feeding was easy and the worlds were pristine. It was the way home. But the path was unstable, woven from desperation and stolen power. The reality bubble was closing around him, severing his connection to this universe. He had to choose. remain and be imprisoned for eternity, or escape through a doorway that might collapse at any moment, potentially scattering his essence across the void between realities. With a final, contemptuous glance at the dying system, at the pitiful alliance that had cornered him, Galactus the Devourer stepped through the tear. It snapped shut behind him. The reality bubble closed on empty space. The dim, dead husk of Helios Prime cast no light. The Cypra Mundi system was saved, but it was a tomb, its star dead, its fleet in ruins. Galactus was gone. The Devourer had departed, but the galaxy was forever scarred. The Cypra Mundi incident was not a victory. It was a survival. A star was dead. A system was crippled. And the Imperium, along with every other faction, had been given a terrifying glimpse of a truth they had long forgotten. They were not the top of the food chain. The temporary alliance shattered completely in the aftermath. The factions retreating to their eternal war, now haunted by the knowledge that something from outside could arrive at any moment and treat their grand conflicts as a minor inconvenience. The Ordo Xenos established a new, secret branch dedicated solely to monitoring for extra-universal incursions, while the Mechanicus debated whether Galactus had been a god, a devil, or merely a machine of cosmic scale they had failed to understand. On Solemnitz, Trazyn the Infinite added a new, empty exhibit to his collection. The placard read simply, "The Devourer. Status: at large." He considered it one of his most poignant acquisitions. Galactus was gone, but he was not forgotten. He had been a force of nature, an equation of consumption that had forced the Grimdark future to briefly unite. He had proven that even in the 41st Millennium, where there is only war, there can still exist something worse. And somewhere, in the infinite tapestry of realities, the Devourer continued his eternal journey. His hunger undimmed, the memory of a resistant, war-torn galaxy now just another data point in his cosmic existence. The war for the galaxy would continue, as it always had. But now, it was fought under the shadow of a much, much larger universe.